Stumble forward, stumble forward. The 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 stumble.
This week on The Stumble Forward, we are joined by Ivan Decker. Ivan's 2018 comedy album, I Wanted to Be a Dinosaur, won the Juno Award for Comedy Album of the Year. His comedy special, Underwater Scissors, can be seen on Netflix. He's one of the funniest regulars on the CBC's most excellent The Debaters, and made his U.S. television debut on Conan. Ivan has performed live across the United States, Canada, Australia, and Bermuda. He is also a loving husband and a doting father, and he's here today to chat about whatever we end up getting around to chatting about. And for those wondering, yes, I'm a fan. I think Ivan's keen observational comedy reveals the inner workings of a very sensitive and thoughtful creature. Who could watch humans this closely if it wasn't out of love for this poor, beleaguered species? Who would care enough to want to celebrate the achingly mundane aspects of the human experience if it wasn't out of a sympathetic want to explain the foibles, greed, and selfishness of the planet's most frustratingly difficult to understand inhabitants? Welcome, Ivan Decker.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, my goodness. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me.
Oh, come on, Ivan. It's just the truth. You know that I get excited when we get to talk. And, we have sat and had a couple of good long chats in the last few months. And I'm going to pretend like that never happened so that everything we discuss today on the podcast can seem and feel like as fresh as it was the moment that I conceived of wanting to discuss this stuff with you in the past.
Yes, it's so nice to meet you.
Yes, this is lovely to meet you too, Ivan Decker, calling from Los Angeles, California. So you just arrived in LA from BC yesterday?
Day before. Yeah.
Do you love LA?
I don't mind it.
Yeah.
I think it's all right. I like it's really one of those like destination points where it sounds like a cliche, but like anything can happen in Los Angeles, right? Like whatever crazy, and it's full of stories like that, right? Like you never know what's going to happen. You do a spot at the Comedy Store and Judd Apatow's in the audience and he puts you in a movie and you're a star. Like
that's the place.
It doesn't happen that often, but it is something that can happen here. That's not going to happen in Red Deer. I mean, it might.
It's weird. And I do want to get around to discussing the problem with trying to break internationally out of Canada and what it's like for comedians and maybe how that differs from music, but just generally in the arts and culture biz in Canada, how hard it is to get out of here once you sort of establish yourself. I want to, just before we get any further, just kind of out myself here a little bit about this podcast and talking to you, who's a comedian, and my fondness for comedians and comedy. Now, I've been thinking about this podcast thing for a while, and I think I'd even reached out to you about being on a podcast last year or the year before, because for me, I'm very interested in comedy. Growing up in my household, my dad was funny. My brother is very funny. My dad, was a working class guy, and he'd come home from work and he'd talk about the funny guys at work and the funny stuff that the funny guys at work did. And I think that I was marinated in this idea as a kid growing up that like my family seemed to value humor and comedy and funny people above all else. Like, it's not like my dad came home from work like, oh, there's a really good person at work who seems to, he has a tithe at his church and he gives, he donates generously to children's charities. Like, none of that. We were funny first. And when I think about the influences that I had in terms of my songwriting and music, so much of it was comedy from the 90s and the 80s. Seinfeld, and we've talked about this, Seinfeld, Letterman, Gary Larson cartoons, Kids in the Hall. And so for me, comedy is important, and people who do comedy are important people for a lot of reasons. And I guess if we're going to dive into the Stumble Forward, the sort of deeper look beyond the obvious, I look at comedy as this very difficult art form. You can't lip sync comedy. And it's meritocratic insofar as if you're not funny, you're not funny. Almost every other art modality these days, with the help of technology, people can be a thing they aren't. Yet in comedy, that's not the case. Can you talk to that at all? Can you speak to this idea? Are you thinking about this, or am I the only guy in town thinking about this?
Yeah, no, it's something that's on my mind since the start. Like it's why, I mean, Seinfeld has talked about like how comedy doesn't need reviews, which is so fun. Like his quote is, "You read a review in the paper that says you were bad. I've already left town with the money."
Yeah.
But to me, it's something that it's being reviewed while it's happening. Yeah. It's one of the only art forms that as you're doing it, like moment to moment, you're getting feedback constantly, especially if you're telling a lot of jokes, you're getting whether or not they laugh. And for me, it's such an interesting thing when you delve into like doing new material, for example, where there aren't as many laughs. And in my brain, I'm like, oh, this is horrible. People are hating this. And then people will be like, oh, that was great. But it was just like, in my mind, the rhythm was off. There wasn't as many laughs. So it's like also your perception of how well you're doing can differ from the audience's. And it's like, yeah, it's such an interesting thing in that everybody in the room is aware too of whether or not you're doing well, if you're getting laughs, if you're not getting laughs. And that can also skew how comfortable they feel. Because the weirdest thing about a comedian not doing well is it cascades. You go into this sort of tailspin because if you acknowledge it, or if the audience kind of gets a whiff that this is not going as planned, you can see them start to feel awkward for you, even though you don't care. And that's why like so much of it is this kind of bravado of like, it doesn't matter. If it's going to be fine. Like, there's another quote of like, you have to have so much confidence as a comedian, and making the audience comfortable is your first job always. And that's why like celebrities and stuff, they get a little bit of a bump because people already feel like they're in the hands of a pro. They know when this person walks out that it's going to be good. They've already decided they're going to enjoy themselves in the car. Whereas you go to a comedy club, sometimes you're 15 minutes into your set, still trying to convince people to enjoy something they're already participating in. You're selling yourself. When you're unknown, when you're like an unknown club comic, you always have this 10, and I'm sure music is the same. Your opening song has to be a banger. Yeah. Kind of get people on board. And it's that idea of like coming out with the confidence to let people know that no matter what happens in this room, we're going to have a good time and it's not going to be weird. And once people can relax and let that go of like, okay, it's not going to be weird, things, you have to be in a very specific mood to have to laugh, right? And that's why laughter is so cathartic and so great, is because I think it comes from a place of comfort. You're around people that you're comfortable laughing at. That's why corporate gigs are so weird. Because it's people around their employees or their boss or their coworkers. Like, this is not a comfortable scenario.
Right. And they may or may not want to be seen to be laughing at certain jokes or for their coworkers as a reveal of the person they really truly are.
Yeah. And then lighting also. That's why lighting comes into it. Yeah. I'm always like, make sure it's dark. People have to be very dark. Yeah. And laugh. Like, it's so crazy when I do gigs and the lights are like way up. I'm like, we're not ready for lights on. We just met.
That about all gigs in a way, like that the audience wants to be able to have that emotional experience in the dark. I had a thought the other day, I had written down that a potential song to write is that I don't mind liking things in front of my friends. And we have that sort of chill of being afraid, especially now in the internet era, and how quickly you can sort of have your opinions or thoughts be sort of destroyed in front of you. And that, it's hard to out yourself for liking even the idea of is this no, not a shameless pleasure, that thing where you're like a song that you're not supposed to like. What's that? Guilty pleasure. And I'm not a guilty. To me, this is a concept that, first of all, I don't get embarrassed very easily, and I'm a performer too, just like you. So like I kind of move through the world like I don't get the red face like, oh hi, this moment where I tripped on the carpet at the grocery store and everybody saw or whatever. That to me is whatever. Like, I've done far more embarrassing things. I've been paid to do far more embarrassing things in front of you. So like, I don't have this thing, so like, that want to sort of be out and performing in the world and be stumbling through is not like I'm not worried about who I am out there in the world.
Yeah, I think that liking something is one of the most vulnerable things you can do now, and admitting it.
What happened why is that?
I think because of the review culture we live in. Everything on the internet is attack, attack, attack. How many stars? How are we doing? How is this? It's like we're so bombarded with, before you see a movie, you're like, should I see it? I don't know. Is it worth my time? What else are you doing? Scrolling?
When you go on stage, do you feel like what you're doing is important?
No, I don't think so. Me? But I think it's maybe to some people. I don't know.
I mean, in your heart, you take it seriously. Like to you, it's important.
Yes, and I find it's important for the people who are there. I really I don't think it's. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people in that room, and I want to make sure that they receive the highest value for their time and their money that they've spent to come and see me. And I think that that's another trap that goes with what I was saying before about this confidence. It can easily switch into arrogance where I don't care about who are these people. And it's like to try to remain confident, but also respecting those people enough I put on a suit, I brush my teeth, I shave, I try to have the best jokes I can for the time that I'm going to be on stage and that they're going to be seeing me. And so I guess in that way, it's important. I think I have what I'm doing is important to me, that they enjoy it as much as they can, as much as possible.
It's funny because I think being a songwriter and coming from, we're living on the fumes of the 1960s in many ways, still in the music business. And there was this sense that
in society in general.
It's true. We really are. There's this sense that ever since Bob Dylan and the Beatles, really, that a song is somehow, it's of chief importance to somebody's life. It's somehow in our culture, this was sort of minted. It was established as the most important art pieces in a person's life are going to be songs, because I have my own theories. I think music sculpts time, but you could argue so does comedy. It happens in time, and it can happen in the background of a disaster. Music can happen in the background of falling in love. I know that I was in a little car accident when I was a teenager, and I was listening to "Walking on the Moon" by the Police. Whenever I hear that, I'm right back at that car accident with my brother. But I guess what I'm getting at here about, I feel that why do I think comedy is so important? Why did comedy have the effect on me? Why do I revere comedy and comedians to this day? Why does the culture, and that's the other thing, is that I've talked to you too before about the business and why aren't you in the bigger venues in Canada, or how do you become a star in your own country? And in many ways, the idea of going to a concert, forgive me or correct me if I'm wrong, but going to a concert is it's an established experience. Oh yeah, you buy tickets to go to a concert. Humans do that. I never went to comedy when I was younger. Forgive me, even being a comedy fan, I'd never really put two and two together that there was a comedy venue that I could buy a ticket and I can go in there and see that thing. Am I crazy? Or
no, I think that's
what
pretty
I do
normal.
Singing songs, people are like, oh, that's important, and a joke, whatever. Is that a thing?
No, I think that, and I think there's a line where you can enjoy, if music is good, you can enjoy it. And same thing with comedy, but also I just think with stand-up, a lot of people take humor very personally. They think it's, it can be risky to go and see a comedian you haven't seen before and, have it be completely, you could connect with this person 0%. Mm-hmm. If they're from a different walk of life than you, if they have completely different, and that's another challenge with writing it, is trying to make sure things are universal. And there are people now is different, because now you can easily look up who's going to be at the club. You can usually find something online about them. And I think that's what's kind of fueling this new comedy boom that we're experiencing, is that finally we have that information available to us.
Right.
instead of just looking at a picture of a headshot and be like, he's holding that rubber chicken.
Yeah.
I bet he's good. You know, it's different now. You can actually look it up. And I think with music, you would hear it on the radio, but also like the idea of going to a concert and I mean, I guess same as anything else, you'd usually be brought to a concert by somebody. I don't know if anybody's like, hey, I've never heard of this band. Nobody has. Let's go.
Yeah, that's true.
People do that.
Yeah.
And it's great because, there's the discovery, but that also happens with comedy too, when you go to an open mic or something like that. But yeah, I think it's funny. Like, I've had people walk out of my shows and I'm like, did you not? Like, what did you think?
Yeah.
You didn't think I was going to talk about walnuts?
Yeah.
You got to watch the stuff online before you come and see the set.
Yeah.
And I think when we were younger, that just wasn't possible. And so
we could have a pre-established relationship with our music artists because we could have their music in our lives on the daily, like 6 months before they came into town to play our city, and we could have established like a relationship to the music. So I guess this begs another question really about comedy. And there was a great a special that I feel like came out 10 or 12 years ago that had Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld and Ricky Gervais and a couple of other major comedians who were talking about, one of the big topics they were discussing was, do you bring out your old hit material? Like, if I play a concert, people want to hear the songs that they love. And if I don't play that, people they're put out by that. They're put off by it. Why didn't he play the song I came to hear? It's the song everybody in the room wants. So as a comedian and as a comedy fan, I think up until I was an adult, like not that long ago, I really honestly feel like I became an adult when I was 37. So that's about 11 years ago. I was under the impression comedians got on stage and they were just funny. They were born funny. And what they're doing up there is just letting it loose. They're just giving it a rip. And it wasn't until and apologies, but it wasn't until later that I realized what an extraordinary discipline writing comedy and being a comedian is that, and it's something actually I want to go a little bit deeper with you about living a life in constant observation. Now, as a songwriter, I've got my songwriting goggles on all the time. In fact, they're welded to my face. I don't really think I can get these things off. I was doing a little songwriting workshop the other day, and I was telling a story about when my grandfather died, like 20 years ago. And I was a young songwriter, and I was in the hospital, and he's passing away. It's clear this is almost over. And I'm looking at it as an artist. Oh God, like what here could I like mine? What's a song in here? What's going on with the human experience? Oh my God, death is close. And like I'm seeing the mortality that's in the genetic strands of my own family. It's right here in front. And I'm like, come on, like back away from the artist BS and just be a human right now with your grandpa. But like, I don't know about you, but I was born this way. I feel like you were born this way. Like, so this sharp peripheral vision that you and I have and other artists like us have, and comedians in particular, like, is this exhausting?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird to me because I'm close to next year. I will be, as long as I was alive and not a comedian, I will be alive.
Right.
And because I started when I was 19. And so I'm really like, what kind of, because I talked to comedians who are like, oh, it's so great that you started so young. But I'm like, but I never went to college. I never had that like early 20s chunk of life experience before I was a comedian to even like draw from or look back on. And I find that like I used to do that with jobs. I would try to get like, I remember when I started doing stand-up, I was like, to relate to people, I'm going to try to get as many different jobs as I can. And so I've had all these different jobs. And I would work places being like, I'll get material about this, and then I'll have material about that. And that way, if I ever do gigs, I can talk to people about this job. But I found that I could never really write material about a job while I was in it. And then it would be only after I quit, I would think back using a different lens, and I'd be able to write about it. It was weird. Like, I think a lot of the observational stuff, it goes in there. It definitely stays. Now I have to just trust my brain that I don't actually have to like turn it on and be like looking in a specific way about something. I'll just think back, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, there's jokes in there.
Because to me, for you, one of the things I feel like I connect to is that you seem to write jokes with these impossibly catchy hooks in that way that like a songwriter would be looking for a turn of phrase or a really delicious concept that maybe that nobody's plumbed the depths of quite yet. You seem to, I mean, there's a few things I'd love to chat about, and you've already brought up that you started when you're 19, and maybe we'll go back to this idea, because I'd also like to talk about the fact that you do so much comedy about food. But really quickly, you started when you're 19, and this is another sort of conundrum in the music business, is that it's a youth-oriented business, and people want their young rock and rollers to be dangerous, beautiful, young, and self-destructive. And as that artist ages, they become in some ways less interesting to the audience, because some of the aspects of what would have been beautiful and cathartic to the audience is starting to diminish as you look like you're getting older, as you're getting, crow's feet around your eyes, as it looks like, you are having the kind of problems that everybody else is having. It's wonderful when you're a young rock and roller to have this, like, you're just a sexy, untouchable, ready to die at any moment superstar singing for the cause of these 3.5-minute pop ditties. Okay, so you start at 19. Is there an ideal age as a comedian? Like, is there... like comedians, I think about, it seems like comedians can age out in front of their audience. Is that true? Or like, how does this work?
Definitely. And I think that also, I am absolutely thinking about that. And I've thought about it since the very start.
Yeah.
Because, I had always, there was nobody young doing it when I started. I started in a time when stand-up was, for lack of a better word, hated by society. It was not a popular thing.
Is it not still hated some ways? But anyway,
somewhere, but it was definitely not where it is now.
Okay.
In terms of...
And just real quick, hated because of what? Like the
it was just overdone. Comedy? I think it was over. Like Seinfeld was off the air. The characters that were depicting comedy on television were like Krusty the Clown and Seinfeld in the show. Even depicted himself as a comedian as somewhat like, this job I got, it's crazy. There's too many of these. And so I think that was, we kind of reached critical mass in the mid 90s, and then throughout the mid 90s to the early aughts, people were just kind of sick of it. It was a joke job, and so it definitely wasn't the thing that people wanted to go into. And then it was around 2007 when Dane Cook blew up on the internet that there was another boom that sort of started it dovetailed from there. I mean, there were people who loved Dane Cook, and then there was the whole alternative movement that came out of contrasting that idea. Obviously it's not completely Dane Cook's fault, but he was the first like big superstar post boom of the 90s. And definitely when I started, I was always thinking about, it's weird because I saw headliners, road comics, who would be doing material about like chasing girls. And they're I'm like, you're too old to be doing that, man. Yeah. Like, it's weird. It's weird that and they lie. They would have to lie about their age and be like, I'm just like you guys. I'm young, and like dress like they're teenagers.
It's the same in rock and roll.
Yeah, same thing. And
I've been saying on stage lately, like, you got to be careful what you write when you're libidinous young rock and roller. Like, I wrote Striptease, and I'm 48, and now people expect to hear it, and it's just like, yikes.
Yeah, I loved your. You did a bit of a Kings of Leon. Yeah, I got a bit that I did.
Yeah, and I like. I mean, it's a warning like that. Those guys, that American band I was joking on stage who sing that song "Sex Is on Fire." It's like, but when you're doing the casino circuit, when you're in your 50s and you're like, you're anyway.
Is it really on fire still?
Is it still on? The age thing is so
great
big.
bit. I loved it.
Oh, thanks, Ivan. It's embarrassing trying to be funny in front of comedians because you guys are the real deal.
No way.
It's the age thing is interesting, I think, for anything.
Yeah, so sorry, to continue, I basically was like, I need to choose an act, a style of comedy that will age with me and I can grow into instead of growing out of. And so that was kind of why I chose the style that I do. Now, of course, it always has reflected the age that I was. When I was younger, I talked about being single and stuff like that. And now I talk about having kids and being married. And I think that it is important to do that too, because, have people my age, they need comedy as well. And it's weird. It's weird to go back. I mean, in music, it's different because, there are so many people trapped in this sort of nostalgia tunnel where they go like, this was what I liked, what I found when I was young.
I know.
And I'm going to stay there when I'm in my car so I can feel like I'm still young. I'm still a cool guy. But it's like, there's also, I just feel like people's consumption of art should grow with them. And I always feel like I hope that I'm sort of maturing as an audience member and that I can appreciate more things that are targeted toward me. I remember reading Bukowski too young, and I was like, this is gross.
I'm really curious why you picked up Bukowski. I feel like I picked up Bukowski because I heard older kids, cooler kids in the cool English classes saying that you're supposed to read that. So I would carry around books in high school that I thought you're supposed to have, but I was like not sure exactly what they were all about. But you said some beautiful, beautiful stuff in there about the need for this comedy thing, and really like it's clear you and I sometimes wonder in the pie graph of my brain, like the hard drive of my brain, how big is the slice of pie of me always thinking about this kind of career stuff? And it's a 24-hour a day. It's at least 38% of my inner life is thinking about this stuff, the nuts and bolts of why certain performance works, certain performance doesn't, why cool usually beats earnestness, why why this youthful songwriting thing. What is it that once you start to age out, people want to go back to the music that's being made by a young, reckless teenager? What is that? And I am no different. And I remember as a kid, my dad was a music fanatic, and he would play records from the 70s over and over and over again. And my dad stayed a pretty good music fan into the late 1980s, bringing home current music. And I thought to myself, man, like I will always, this was a pledge I made to myself when I was a teenager, that I'll always be into new music. I'll always be checking out new music. And of course, that's not happened. I go back to the music that meant the most to me when I had, in some ways, the most emotional shelf space in my life to feel the full dynamism of the kind of feelings that are out there to be felt when you're young. And the music that accompanies all that feels so profound and so big and so wild that when I'm listening to the Smiths, am I going, woo, this is me when I'm a teenager? I don't think it is. I think when I'm listening to the Smiths, I'm still thinking, man, this cat can write. This cat can write. And I think when I was young, I was starting to get the sense that this is some of the best lyric writing in pop music. Again, I'm guessing you go through all this stuff when you're within the context, looking at the lens of your eye as to how other people are doing it. I mean, it's first of all, it's very comforting to know that I'm not the only one that thinks that way. I mean, we have this weird, and I love it. That's the part is I wouldn't trade it, but it is interesting to have this. Everything is going through. I heard about an Olympic rower who developed a strategy around life, and I feel like it kind of applies to myself. Maybe you feel this way too, but it's like, in order to win in the Olympics, he said, everything I did in my life, every action was prefaced by me asking the question, will this make the boat go faster? Whether it's like eating an apple versus a chocolate bar, or everything he does is like, he would go, not do I want to do this or do I not want to do this? He would say, will this make the boat go faster? Yeah. And that's how I feel about comedy and so many things. There are so many things that I do in my life where I think, is this going to make me funnier? Is this going to make me a better comedian? And that's when I do bad gigs. If I'm flying somewhere I don't want to go, somewhere I've never been before, the crowd is small, I'm like, this is going to make me stronger. This is going to make me better at this. Even if it's bad, even if I don't want to do it, I'm going to do it. Or even things I choose to consume, things I read, things I watch. There's just so much that I'm doing that's mining, hoping to find that something that, you're trying to get your brain to be just line up in the right way. Yep. Because you've done it before, because you've created incredible things and you know this.
And so I don't know, I feel like with jokes I've written in the past, every joke I write that it's really good, I'm like, well, that's it. That's the last one. I don't know if you have that.
Oh yeah.
You're like, that's the last great song. Yeah. And it's not true. We all know that.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say if it's not true or not. I mean, I wrote a tune called Battlefords, and I know your dad comes from North Battleford, and that tune was like a gift. And I feel like I hadn't written a song that good in about 10 years. So I do know that, like, which isn't to say I hadn't written a good song in 10 years, but I hadn't written a song that good in 10 years. It's hard to say. Like, I mean, this is what you're talking about is, in some ways, like when I even conceived of this podcast called The Stumble Forward, it was a lot about a long life and a long professional life, a life of creating things and allowing yourself to age in a way that's graceful and thoughtful, and to be cognizant of the person and the artist that you're becoming as you do age. And in many ways, you know, this is just episode 1 of this podcast, and I'm sure that the narratives will start to sort themselves out. But it's interesting to me what you're saying, because in the last year, I've really gone deep with the Stoics, and I sort of feel like this do stuff for the betterment of you is like, when I said I became an adult around 37, that's when I started to think about my health. That's when I started to think about stuff like this, which was, how about I engineer aspects of my life that make me better and make me healthier and make me happier and make me a better person to my family, to my wife. And just in general, you become that better person that operates at a higher effectiveness in everything. That to me is like just being around a while. And in some ways now, when I think about songwriters that I want to hear, and I do like to hear from older people because I'm interested in the older person's experience. I don't need to hear if your sex is on fire, because that's not where I'm at, you know?
We all know it's on fire.
It's been on fire, Ivan, since day one, man. It's always going to be. So I guess my question for a comedian, like, since you and I are having this more or less constant ongoing inner dialogue about our work, our lives, our effectiveness, like, what does a comedian dream about aging out in the business? Like, are you thinking, man, when I'm 70 and I'm like a George Carlin and I'm hitting the stage and I'm like, what is the next 40 years look like to you?
Yeah. I mean, I never want to stop performing. People keep coming out. And I think that it goes deeper. There's always something more to find, something new in this art form. There's a new layer, and even just, as you age, you live more life and you have more to talk about. And it's hard because, you know, there's a lot of, like music, it's a well-trodden path. There's certainly a lot of people that have done it before. But I think even just going back to what you were saying about the Battlefield, it's like, it's such a great, isn't it great knowing, like, and I have this with jokes where you write it and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to write, but it's so wonderful that it's yours, though. Like, you get to play it whenever you want,
man.
And every time you play it, it's like writing it again. It's a little bit where you're like, yeah, I did this.
So huge.
It's so true. It feels so great to have that. So it's like you have this, it's that fight where you have in your mind where you're like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to write something like that again. But at the same time, I did write it and I have it.
Right.
And I can do it whenever I want. I can perform it for this audience, and I get to reap the rewards. I get to feel it. You know, to me, a really good joke, it's just like a recipe. I think it's like a chef. It's like you've created this dish.
Yes.
This little, for me, it's like a 5-minute chunk of words that I get to say, that I get to watch an audience thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah, and you get to lean into that prepared thing. Like, I know you did theater when you were a kid. I did theater too, and I learned. I've done theater as an adult, more sort of off the stage than on, but I sure have learned that, like, leaning into the script when things are going wrong. Like, I look at what you and I do, and you can get up and do your cinnamon raisin bit, or I can get up and do my Battlefords bit, and I know that it's guaranteed because in some ways the writing has been so proven. It's got such a track record that even as a performer, it's not like I'm taking a holiday up there, like, oh, I can just like snooze through this one because it's going to do all the work for me. But I'm fiercely improvisational, which I think probably people like you and I are. And I can be on stage getting pretty bored with the situation. I can get on stage being pretty bored by singing a song that I've already sung 1,000 or 1,500 times in my life. And so for my own entertainment, I'm starting to mess with the script. I did a show called The God That Comes, and my director started to see that I was off-roading a lot. And he said, all we got to do is just lean into the script. And in many ways, this is just another sort of wonderful sort of product of getting older, is that I do lean into some of the past work. Like you're saying, I've already written this song. These people are here and interested to hear it. All I have to do is enmesh myself with the emotion, spend the next 3 minutes, 40 seconds singing this song, and then it's over. Like, I don't have to prove to these people how in the moment I could be. Oh my God, you're not going to believe how quick I can think on my feet in this situation. Like, I think sometimes what I'm looking to get from the performance and what the audience is looking to get from the performance are two different things. And in some ways, what I'm looking to get from my whole creative life is different. Like, I do like those kinds of challenges of writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess, sorry, I'm I'm the king of digression, and even when I started to think about doing this podcast, it's like, yeah, but your digressing is going to destroy your podcast career. Anyways,
I don't think so. I think I'm having a wonderful conversation.
Bless you, Ivan. Hey, so there's this sense in rock and roll and musicians, there's always this joke, at least in touring vans that I've been in, all musicians want to be comedians, and we're under the impression that all comedians want to be musicians. Is this true, do you think?
I think so, yeah. I feel like comedians want to be rock stars or like, and we want to be funny, whatever it is. Yeah.
Well, to me, it has to be there's something about comedy and music that is very similar. And then there's something about comedy and music that the other one has in abundance, and that the one, like, comedy has in abundance this like great meritocratic thing where if you're great, you're great and everybody knows it. And if you're not that great, everybody knows it. In music, it's like, well, we got auto-tune and a few things here to help, the very average person sound very good. So that's one thing that comedy has that music doesn't. What we have in music,
I think there's a bit more of things like auto-tune in comedy sort of happening now, though, with like access to venues, social media, that kind of thing. Like, people can definitely accelerate a little bit more, but it is true where it's like, once you're in the room, you got to be good.
And this to me is very exciting.
Just to go back and answer the previous question.
Sorry,
I think that,
I'm new to this podcast thing.
No, it's okay.
I don't need them to be answered.
I'm just trying to. I had a thought. I just want to get it out there.
Apologies. Yes.
But it's. I think it's just like comedians. We long to be taken seriously, and maybe musicians long to not have to be taken seriously.
Oh,
I think maybe that's the opposite, right? Whereas like we just want to be able to go on stage and be real for a minute and have people like it, which seems to be happening in music. I think maybe in music, it's like, man, I wish I didn't have to come out there and be like, all right, here's being really real right now.
That's
maybe that's what it is.
No, that is an absurdly brilliant look at things. And in fact, when I think about comedians and comedy actors, like, once they do a dramatic turn in Hollywood, now they're serious. Oh, Adam Sandler, he did a serious thing. He can be taken seriously now. This is so huge. I can't believe I've never had this thought, and I think you're absolutely right. There is this thing in music, and it's because, like, again, what I love about comedy, what I loved about The Kids in the Hall, and you and I have talked about this, like, I have a want to plumb the absurdist depths of this life, which is the thing I love about your comedy. And in some ways, like, I've liked humorous music, not Weird Al Yankovic and not, that kind of, but I like music that is absurd and silly and is not always going to take itself so seriously. I feel like that's the kind of song I tend to want to write. I feel like that's the kind of song, a silly-ish song. Like, look, Frank Zappa, who I'm a huge fan of, is so divisive because in some ways you're never going to get, oh, here's Frank sitting down with his deepest, most his innermost thoughts. You're never going to get that from Frank Zappa. You're always going to get this punch in the face of absurdity, which I have an almost limitless appetite for that kind of thing. the person who comes to the show wants to have that feeling of seriousness. I think you're absolutely right. This is crazy, Ivan. And maybe because I do see what the comedian is doing as an artist, as artists work in a world of sort of increasing conformity, and artists now are called content creators, and art is now called content. And, you know, on my conspiratorial side says that this is a way to dumb down the idea of greatness and grandeur within the context of the cultural enterprise, and that don't want too much, don't think too big, don't want for something extraordinary, take what you're given, don't ask for more. Everything is just supposed to be average. Here's a plate of content. Go over in the corner and eat your damn content.
Drink your content smoothie. You don't need to chew. Just open your throat and dump that content down there while you're on the bus. And when you get to the factory, tighten those bolts.
I still want art to be great.
Yes, me too.
I still want comedy to be great. When I see comedians, I think this is an artist who's doing the serious work of watching the human species fumble its way through this life, and so that we can all take a moment and relax and breathe into the fact that we're all making mistakes constantly. We're all stumbling forward constantly. We're all like, there's never been something as absurd as this existence. Like, and that we can't just let the heat off for that reason alone.
Yeah. And I think we both have that ability to make people feel a feeling that maybe they weren't feeling when they came in, which is such a powerful thing. And I think it's very cool to get to do. And for me, I hope to write comedy that stays with you the way a song does. A song, like, it goes somewhere below your sense memory. And it just, like, it's just weird because, like, you know, they're the cliche of, like, you have a song in your heart. It's like, it's there. Songs just, like, stay in you somewhere, and you'll just be brushing your teeth and you're like, oh, there's that song. So I've always, like, is there a way to get comedy into that lower level? And so that's why I love talking about things that I think can connect people in ways they didn't know they were connected. Bring up topics, ways of feeling in a scenario where you go, I can't believe I'm not the only one that feels like this. And having that sort of emotional memory attached to the in the moment laughter, which is why when I'm trying new material, I'm often just trying to see if these ideas or even things people will connect with first and foremost. I'm not trying for cheap laughs or big laughs right out of the gate. I want to know if this is something people will connect with. I mean, obviously the things I talk about are not heavy. It's silly things, little minutia of life. But if people can go away from, and I've had people say this to me where they say, you know, I can't, like, I didn't know that you thought about this. I thought, like I said, I thought I was the only one that thought about that tiny thing that you mentioned. And I think that that's sort of my goal, is to have that, like you said, bringing people together through shared experiences. But for me, it's that extra layer. I want them to not even know that they were having that shared experience. And now when they do, they'll feel connected.
So what is that thing then when everybody in the room, so you are such a beautiful observational comedian, and you put out a grand observation it reveals instantly something that we're a little ism that we're all involved in doing in our own private moments, and that the whole room, it's revealed that we're all the same at that surprise in that moment. Is that true? Is that what it is? Is it that?
Yeah. And just for the listener to have an example of this, because I know it's frustrating to hear me talk about it with it. Like a good example of this would be when I say that when you're trying to find something in your teeth, you count your own teeth. Right. And everybody goes, oh yeah, I do that.
Yes. It's this many over from the middle.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's good. My question is though, like, because so I can look at a song and unpack some of the stuff. Why is there a song in your heart? Like, so lyric and melody, the melody punctuates if you're learning a language, if you can learn songs in that language, you're going to learn the language much more quickly. And the whole thing about attaching words to music makes words like it gives you a superpower once you attach a melody to those words. Now, that's, I think, the superpower that the songwriter has. Now, most people are listening to that song at home in a pre-recorded media, and they are like developing a relationship with the lyrics and that melody and sort of committing it to their hearts. What I'm seeing, what you're sort of talking about, and some of that observational stuff you're doing on stage is that you lead everybody up with this narrative, and then boom, the hook of the bit comes in, or the punchline, and that everybody in the room is struck immediately with this oneness of all being able to relate to this experience all at the same time. But you sort of held their hand right up to the finish line without anybody knowing what the big reveal was going to be, what the big point of human connection you were going to reveal through your very acute observation of like mundane human life. Am I getting somewhere with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, that's where the technical side of what I'm doing comes in. You know, you have all the information there, then you need to arrange it in a way that has that thread, that lead, and holding back just enough that people are curious, they stay involved, and then you bring in, and then, you know, I use old-timey techniques like having a lot of consonants in the punchline makes it funnier for some reason. Nobody knows why. I was thinking about even just like letters of the alphabet. You notice in a show, whenever they say an airplane seat, if it wants to be funny, it's always F. I'm in 11F. F is the funniest letter because A is the first one, and then after that, all the rest, they rhyme. B, C, D, E.
Oh, crazy.
And then F is the first incongruity. So F is funny. F is the funniest letter that's close, because you've established a rhyme scheme. You've lulled into this comfort. B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden F comes at you.
Yeah.
It's funny.
This is nuts. And it astounds me that you are going here. I mean, I'm thinking about words and
and you do such a beautiful job, might I say. You've done enough complimenting of me. I just want to let you know that way that the words you choose for lyrics to me are just, it's incredible. It takes me out of songs when people have something, they have the wrong word.
I agree. I would say this, that the feeling of a word, or the sound and flavor of a word, or the texture of a word is more important than the meaning in songwriting a lot of time.
Oh, for sure. Comedy too.
Okay, so hold it. Are we talking about like established scientific truths that if you and I went behind closed doors with our cohorts, we've all discussed this, and this is agreed upon knowledge? Or are you and I just outing right now that you and I singularly, personally, this is what we're thinking about, and there's a 98% likelihood that everybody else in our ilk is doing the same? Or hold it, when you say F, like this is done science.
I think that maybe people don't think about it as deeply as I do. They just kind of, you get to know it as you perform.
Yeah.
But there is, old vaudeville terminology would always talk about K. K sounds are funny. Mm-hmm. Add as many K's as you can into your punchline. But I go further. I think about things, even just funny words, like soup is a funny word for some reason. The way it feels. And I know that this obviously happens in music too. And I think that there's a little from column A and a little from column B in there, where like there are established rules but I think there's also rules that people are abiding by that they don't even know why, because both of our art forms have been around for so long that people just watch what other people are doing and they take that without really knowing why or what is happening. I mean, you can dive super deep into this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is such a weird thing. And I've read some sort of comedy science stuff, and it sort of talks about that idea of like establishing a pattern and then having an incongruity. And that's why, comedy, there's the rule of thirds is what they call it, where they're like, it's always three guys walk into a bar, two guys are normal, and then the third guy's a bit different.
Right.
And that's sort of your basic, but that's just from, establishing a pattern and then changing the pattern is sort of the basic thing that happens. But like music, that's a 1-4-5. You can do more if you want.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
A lot of people have made a great career off 1-4-5.
They sure have. Yeah.
But, if you don't want to play cowboy chords, you can do some other stuff. And to me, that's what I want to do. I want to try to still working within the framework and having things in there that people could recognize. I got to go back to the one sometimes.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'm doing things, shattering that expectation a little bit more. And I think that's also, you have to take into account the experience of your audience too, right? Like if they've never heard music before, 1-4-5 is going to be a pretty big punch. But if they've heard a lot of it, you offer them something else, something that breaks that a little bit above, then you'll hopefully bring them up with you to that level. But it's a risky thing because you could alienate an audience. And so I always try to have something, there's a broad spectrum and have layers in there for everybody. If you watch me more than once, I want you to be able to have something else. I don't know if you think about any of this stuff.
Oh, all the time. And I feel like your layers are like, to me, it's obvious how the depth to what you do. When I'm listening to you talk, I'm listening to what me as a grumpy music fan, like, again, at this songwriters workshop I was doing the other day, I was talking about the blissful naivete when you're a young artist. It masquerades as courage because you haven't yet accumulated any sense of this stuff we're talking about. You haven't figured out the science. You haven't been on stage enough to know this works, this doesn't. And in many ways, when you're stumbling around in your naivete as a young artist, the audience perceives that as great courage, which is, I think, in some ways why we are so drawn to young artists, because it look at the audacity, look at the wildness, look at how rowdy this person is. And it's because they don't know yet that you're not supposed to do any of that. And they haven't aged, and they're just doing the stuff. And we think, man, what an incredibly courageous sort. And really, at the end of the day, it's pure naivete. So in thinking again about what the audience is looking for, I think that some of that naivete masquerading as courage is in fact what people are looking for from their music and musicians. But like you, I am at that, you're 10 years younger than me. You were born in 85, I was born in 75. So like, I'm 48 now. And like, if you can look into your 10-year future, like I'm still piecing this stuff that you're talking about, the nuts and bolts, the science aspects of the actual performance, the consonants that are funnier than other consonants. And I think, and I catch myself as a middle-aged person saying this all the time, I'm doing the best work of my life, I'll say to people. And how many times through our lives have we heard other middle-aged artists say that, and we all roll our eyes going like, dude, you haven't done something that I wanted to hear in 20 years. Yeah. But every middle-aged person, because they're on a very self-reflective journey, or artists in general on a very self-reflective journey, so you will arrive at this place, you're 38 or 48 years old, and you're going nuts and bolts deep on the minutia, on the science and magic and alchemy of performance. Like, are we getting further away from getting the audience what they want? Or are we getting closer? For me, it's the marriage of the naivete as courage, as well as the scientifically thought out consonants that are funnier, numbers that are funnier, letters that are funnier. How do you marry that blissful ignorance with knowing too much?
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge. I like to get drunk. No.
I used to do that. I don't anymore, but that was the way I used to do it. It was like, if I drink, I'll seem crazy up there.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the big challenge, right? Taking what you've learned, but also allowing, that's why you go through this wave, I think, as an artist too, where like you have that youthful naivety, but then this happens in comedy where you reach a real kind of low point where you're like, everything's been done. I can't do anything. This is, and then I think as you progress, you have nowhere to go. You just have to keep going and write yourself out of that hole, because I think that's a hole that a lot of artists fall into, is especially in this content crazy world we're in now, where you're like, how could I possibly say or do anything that hasn't been done or whatever? And I think that you eventually come out of it. You have to allow yourself to let go of those ideas that what you're doing is unoriginal or whatever, because, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of hamburgers out there. Sure, they're all hamburgers, but you can't be like, why would I make a hamburger? A lot of people are making hamburgers. People are still trying to make the best hamburger.
I know.
And so why not get involved in that? You know, I do think there's that thing where you have this tendency to be like, I want to find this area that exists where nobody's gone. And it's this empty, and I can get in there and I can do what I want artistically. But it's so hard to find that place when what you could also do is just find a path that has been trodden, but go there in your own way. Do your own thing when you're traveling down it. And I think that that's where that marriage comes from. It's like accepting that, but also the path that what you've learned. Maybe the person who went down there before you didn't have this knowledge that you have. And you're going to be able to do it better or more interesting. I feel like terms like better don't really belong in art per se. It's all up to the consumer.
Thanks, Ivan.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
The Stumble Forward is an Isadora Media production and is hosted by Hawksley Workman and produced by Jennifer Kavanaugh. Be sure to subscribe and follow The Stumble Forward. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/Hawksley Workman. Thank you for listening.
Stumble forward, the stumble forward.